this computer. Awesome. Yeah. So, Gwilym, you were just talking about how people living on the borderlands of sort of Wales and England, it's a strange identity to have. And I feel like I'm living in a borderland myself, living in Australia on Indigenous land, but being someone who comes from, you know, I've got English, Irish, and Scottish ancestry, and my husband's got Welsh ancestry actually, and so my kids will have this mixed bag of Celtic mongrel as well. But it's like, what is this? What is this thing about identity and where we come from and who we are? And so you're saying people living in the UK also have this sense of, is it like the deeper you get into Wales, there's a more clearer identity of who you are, or is it sort of?
I mean, I suppose it begins with your family. And you know what I was just sort of touching on really with regards to where I grew up, Wrexham, is that it's a border town, and therefore there are lots of influences that pass through both ways, Welsh and English, and you know, lots of other cultures turning up from Europe also, particularly in the last few years, you know, Polish folks, folks from Eastern Europe. So lots of different cultural influences coming in. But in my experience, um, it was a strange place to grow up because of the cultural politics, you know, about how Wales relates to England and England relates to Wales. So it's not so much that I think that we always need to strive for some type of cultural purity or sort of pure ethnic identity. I don't believe in that stuff really. Just sort of acknowledging that there sometimes, depending on I suppose, the power relationships, the power dynamics between different cultures, which is really a political reality for many, many people across the globe, that there's sometimes a strangeness about it, that sometimes it can feel a little bit schizophrenic. Because on one side, for example, you know, I grew up in a Welsh-speaking family, went to a Welsh-speaking school, but even though I was in a Welsh-speaking school, the vast majority of kids didn't come from Welsh-speaking families, and therefore the main language of the school was English, even though we were taught through Welsh. So all of our education happens through the medium of Welsh, but all of my socializing, or the vast majority of it, happened through the medium of English, even
Yeah,
though my
right.
family life was also Welsh. So it's kind of, it's just a peculiar mix to grow up to grow up in. And sometimes I think it's difficult to actually distinguish what the real lived cultural influences are on your life, because it's easy to say, well, I'm Welsh and I was born Welsh and my family are Welsh and I was educated in Welsh and blah, blah, blah. But really, my cultural life was, you know, shot through with many different influences, not just English, but Anglo-American, you know, American culture, such a massive influence on all of us. So if our identity is something that's drawn from the broader pool of culture, then, you know, I sometimes feel like to be really um, upfront about who I am, therefore, I'm not just Welsh. There's loads of other stuff in there too. Yeah, as a complex human being who's been influenced by lots of different cultures and you know, cultural expressions. It's not just the case that I'm one thing, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. But do you, even though you're not just one thing, um, there's I'm sensing that maybe there's a part of you that does have a lot of joy around identifying as being Welsh, or is that sort of, obviously there's treasures of the culture which it must be uh, it must be something really special to be able to speak a language that's not English, and you know, and yeah, know the traditions and the folklore and the mythology which you're so deeply embedded in, and sort of like,
Yeah.
yeah, that must, yeah, is there a sense that there's is there maybe a yearning for like the past there, or is there like there's a pride but a yearning for a time pre-modernity? And this is what I was speaking about with Johnny Dillon. Like I was saying, I feel like I don't belong in Australia because I'm not Indigenous here, and I'm looking for this Indigenous cultural story of my own where I'm not just a colonizer, and we're not just colonizers here. We have a complex story here. And sort of I was talking about how, it's Ireland or it's Scotland or it's England, it's these other things. And then Johnny was saying, he's like, I'm Irish and I live in Ireland. And he's like, even I feel sometimes like I don't belong, or I've got challenges with identity. Like what is the Irish identity? Who is Ireland? Like is it this sort of
Mm.
performance for the world, or is it and also then looking to the past, like working at the National Folklore Commission, for him, he is always looking to these voices and stories and faces of the past. And there's
Mm.
these treasures there that I guess the modernity might be trying to shuffle off. And
Yeah. I mean, I think as you were talking then, I was just thinking, wow, it's all really complicated.
it's so complex. And I thought
It is complex.
this identity thing was like a problem that was not unique, obviously, to colonized settler nations, but that it
Mm.
seemed to be, well, this is our problem. But it's not. Like I had this real moment of, wow, we're all sort of struggling with who are we? And
Well, I mean, I personally think it's a human problem, you know.
mm,
I don't necessarily think it's modern really. I think it's something that humanity has always had to grapple with at certain stages of its evolution. Not all the time and not for everybody, but I think my own response to my own identity is that I'm simply gravitating to what's instinctive, I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah,
Your family upbringing is so formative. The
mm,
language that you're given as you grow up, and the culture, the cultural transmission that happens. We're like little sponges. You've
mm,
got little kids. We sort of absorb stuff so quickly.
mm,
And we're not just absorbing words and grammar and syntax. We're absorbing whole cultural meanings. We're absorbing a whole network of culture, this vast and complex and ancient inherited thing that exists, amongst our people.
mm,
So it's very instinctive in one sense. It's the most natural thing in the world for me to further immerse myself in the culture which has become my identity. But
mm,
also in the modern period, it's much easier for us to choose not to be the thing that we grew up as. So,
mm,
plenty of my friends who grew up in a very similar situation to me, I would say that yeah, they have an automatic identity as Welsh, but there's nothing really that distinguishes their culture that much from the culture of English folks.
mm,
Drive the same cars, we watch the same films, we read the same books, we engage in the same type of culture, particularly these days because it's so readily available through our digital devices.
mm,
That for some people culture just doesn't go that deep, or ethnicity doesn't go that deep, and instead culture is something far more diverse and far more mixed and far more various. There's so much variety in how we can experience culture these days that ethnicity doesn't always come into it. So I think it's a personal thing.
yeah,
Like I definitely made a choice as an adult, as a young adult, to think, no, I want to pursue my traditions and I
mm,
want to pursue this part of who I am, my identity, because I'm so engrossed by it and fascinated by it, and it's so enriching to my life. But I could easily have made another decision because there's plenty of other types of culture that were available to me. And to a degree, I still grew up in a very hybrid culture. I'm a big, you know, music fan. I love soul music and,
mm,
different types of black music in particular, and, sort of rock and roll from the 60s, you know, like so many influences I have that are just nothing to do with Wales,
Yeah.
you know, so it's kind of like it's yeah, I can't imagine that that humanity has ever faced anything but this rich diversity when we have so much access to so much, you know. Obviously, in the past, in more rural communities, in smaller family and tribal settings where you know, where there is just the culture of the community, of course, that diversity isn't available. But, you know, for the
Mm.
last few thousand years, we have been traveling around a fair amount and there has been
Yeah.
cross-cultural influence. Of course there has. And today it's just kind of on steroids, if you like the volume has been turned up to 11 and culture becomes very much a choice, I think, you know, particularly for us first world people with all of our gizmos and technologies.
Do
Mm.
you think it's important to hold on to the ethnic culture though? Amongst all of this other culture, is the choice of like a heritage or an ancestral culture an important one, or is it just perhaps it's
If it
just
serves
a
you,
choice? Yeah, if it serves you. So you think it's an individual's, obviously it's an individual's choice,
yeah,
but I guess my
because
question is for people living in nations that potentially they don't have a deep time connection to the land that they're living on. So my ancestors were probably 4 generations back, so like mid 19th century, five generations back, and it's you know, beyond that, there's my history jumps across oceans to distant places, and sort of I guess my question is when you live in these more modern colonized nations, the you kind of have a lot of that sort of modern Western culture that might be a bit more based around consumerism or about fast-paced sort of tech, or yeah, as opposed to like a traditional culture that might have a language or a music, which is what we'll get onto. Like there's that sort of, it's here, but it's a bit more tenuous. It's sort of it's we have to try and find it, or like we have to seek it out because our soul's calling us to it. But
mm,
yeah, just what are your thoughts about, I guess, the for
I
people
think this
living
is
in,
something that humanity has faced time and time again.
yeah, yeah,
And I don't think it's necessarily a modern ill. Um, I mean, you know, immersing oneself in one's ethnicity, let's say, which includes culture and identity and language and all that stuff,
mm,
you know, it can be a bad thing. It
yeah,
can result in supremacy. It can result
mm,
in a fetishization. It can result in a sense of superiority or a sense of othering, you know, other human beings. So my own personal philosophy is that, you know, as much as possible, culture should bring people together. Um, and therefore, sometimes we have to make difficult choices about, well, which people is my culture bringing me closer to?
mm,
Is my culture bringing me together with a bunch of fascists? Or is my culture bringing me together with a bunch of peaceful people who want to paint flowers on the walls and do happy things? Yeah, to
mm,
not to be too sort of light about it or fluffy about it, but you know, there's a basic choice. So, what is our culture connecting us to? Um, is it further connecting us to our humanity?
mm,
And is it further bringing us into contact with something which is valuable and profound and enhancing and life affirming? Or is it shutting us down and turning us into, you know, myopic, close-minded, ignorant people?
mm,
So, and you know, this all arises, you know, fascinatingly enough, for me, out of a study of my own culture is, well, okay, so we get to understand, in, I suppose, in an anthropological sense, therefore, what culture is and how it moves and what it can do and what it can't do, and how culture changes us and how culture gives us certain things, but also can potentially close us off from other things. So I don't want to over fetishize ethnicity and identity, um, because I identify as a human being first before I'm
Mm,
anything else.
yeah,
And I think that's a crucial value.
yeah.
That there needs to be a priority in that sense, because it's very easy for it to turn into sort of blood and soil
Mm,
politics. I will die for my people. I mean, sometimes we need to die for our people. There are appropriate opportunities where that is the thing to do, but sometimes there isn't, and particularly when culture can be manipulated in such a way that our worldview can be skewed towards serving someone else's political agenda,
yes.
especially in the modern period. I think that knowing as much as possible how our own culture works is really crucial to make sure that we keep affirming our humanity and not denying other people theirs.
Yeah.
And therefore, the crisis that humanity continually faces is the shift in culture. And therefore, tribes, families, extended families would have to leave areas because of resource depletion or what have you. Whatever reason, we've got
Mm,
to go, we've got to leave, we've got to travel. And in traveling and in moving and in, members of the community passing on and different memories being lost and culture evolving and changing, humanity has continually faced this evolution of
mm,
culture and the crisis that arises because our own identities ourselves are kind of tied into this broader external force of culture. And as it
mm,
shifts, we feel destabilized by it. Of course we do. So I don't think we've ever not faced that. I don't think
yeah.
it's a particularly new problem.
How interesting.
Mm.
That's really interesting. Because I sort of feel like within such a globalized world, it's hard to know what we can hold on to nowadays. Well, once upon a time when you lived in a small village and you sort of your parents and your grandparents and their parents all did the same sort of things. Like there was a familiarity and there were traditions which carried you from birth to death. And um, yeah, I think that's what I'm looking for. I want to find that structure and that foundation that sits underneath uh, modern life and what I'm calling modern life in the Western world, I guess, and be held by those stories again. And and I know your specialty, Gwilym, is mythology. So it's like, what is this mythic age? Like, what are we living in now? Sort of like we've had, I guess, ages come before us where there were particular stories, I guess, that would carry people through and transmit information and wisdom. And now there's so much information that it's. What are your thoughts on the mythic age that we are in, or are we entering a new age, or is it just is as you say, is it actually just all the same thing continuing on, and we're not special. This isn't unique. This is just the nature of the world.
I think something new is occurring. I personally, um, I can't I can't imagine how having such a powerful array of communication tools and devices wouldn't precipitate a massive transformation and revolution in human culture.
Mm,
So there is definitely something novel, new, radical, revolutionary occurring right now. The fact that I can talk to you from the other side of the
mm,
planet, it's a big deal. It's
yeah.
never happened before, yeah. And of course, we become familiar to these things, and then we just think they're normal. But this, in light of the last 300,000 years of human evolution, this is definitely not normal.
Mm,
It's amazing and it's powerful, and I'm not afraid of it, and I don't think we should be afraid of it. But it's definitely precipitating a revolution. And more than anything, it is going to revolutionize identity, I think. We
Mm,
cannot we cannot go it's impossible to go through a cultural revolution, and culture is the context within which our identities exist, and we
mm,
anchor ourselves to these cultures. You can't have such a cultural revolution without it then impacting a sense of identity. So where are we in terms of mythology, therefore, as
mm,
mythology is one of the bedrocks of human culture? Um, mythology, myths in many ways are foundational strands of meaning, let's say, in culture. And in that modern anthropological or philosophical description, we're not necessarily talking about actual discrete narratives told by storytellers. We're talking about common motifs and trends and values and ideals. That's what we mean by myth in that broader, more modern sense. So, for example, the heroic ideal, the
mm,
myth of the great hero, is still something that we're drawn to, and we find it, projected across cinema screens the length and breadth of the planet.
mm,
So, we're still very much in the grip of mythology, and we always will be. I think it's what defines us in many ways as a humanity. And whether we like it or not, we are going to be living through an enormous upheaval in these myths
mm,
by sheer virtue of them being communicated and transmitted so quickly and
mm,
so powerfully and so broadly, like people's myths are now mixing quicker than they ever have before. Now, we can say that, okay, so in China, there is still a language barrier, and they still have a discrete sort of communication or media culture. But even still, we can see that the myths that take hold in Chinese culture are very similar to the myths that take hold in American culture and French
mm.
culture and German culture. So even the language barrier isn't even that important anymore, and we're living in a far more universal world than we ever have done before. This is a very long answer to
No, I love it. Go
well,
on.
excuse me. So we're facing a massive revolution, and not to be a total pessimist about it, but I don't think that it's going to be an easy road for us. I think we're
Mm,
going to be very challenged, and I think we're already seeing how challenging it is. We're already seeing some parts of culture retreating into very conservative, very narrow, very challenged and threatened types of behavior. Yeah.
mm,
Like that's already occurring. It was always there, but where, it's expressing itself in far more organized and coherent ways.
mm,
The dark side of human culture is never very far away, but we're seeing a particular expression of it these days in terms of identity, particularly when we have such a broad spectrum of identities being presented through our digital mediums.
mm,
From an absolutely revolutionary and totally new ways of thinking about identity. And for me, this is, in some ways, it's a great thing because it means that people feel a lot of freedom and a lot of liberty. But conversely, it's also very threatening to a lot of other people. And so we're going to have these reactions.
mm,
The reactionary response is going to increase on a par with the degree of free expression that's going to be. And I
mm.
don't think we can escape that. I don't think we can overcome that until, and here I am, as someone fascinated by myths. Of course, I've got all the answers. Myths are the answer until we start working through the myths, until
Yeah.
we actually start paying attention to what these myths are. And the only, or the best way to start learning about how myths um, influence us and how we can start being aware of myths. And what I'm often saying to my students, or what I have said often over the years is, are you using myths or are myths using you? This
Mm,
is the fundamental question we need to ask ourselves, Are we aware of the myths that we are using,
mm,
and we are using them for purposes, and therefore we have a handle on them? Or
mm,
are we merely serving someone else's mythic projection? Are we merely being caught up in someone else's mythology, and we have become fundamentalists in someone else's religion? So these are the important questions that we need to ask, and the best way to understand what's going on is to study our mythic traditions, because we sensitize ourselves to what our mythic tradition
mm,
is, and we get to know the shape and the form, the movement of myth in culture, therefore. So, ironically, by immersing oneself with awareness, so
mm,
paying attention, by
mm,
uh, uh, immersing ourselves in myth, we really get to know what myth is and what it feels like and how it moves. And we get to see it in our lives, and we get to
mm,
understand how it influences us and people around us. So we're more immune to its dark side, and
yeah.
we're more attuning to being able to draw out the value that we need from it. The spiritual nourishment, therefore, that's implied in myth becomes more available, and we're more immune to its dangers, if you like.
I
There you
like
go, rant over.
that was fantastic. That's yeah, wow. There's a lot in that, Gwilym. I
Yeah,
think
there is.
I sort of feel yeah, that we're at the moment we're sort of so susceptible to buying into other people's myths, aren't we? We're just all sort of falling down the rabbit hole of other myths and not scrutinizing what we're doing. And you just like Instagram is a perfect example of falling into the myth hole, the warren of myth of whatever happens to be trending. And it's like trending and it's almost like it's got no one's really controlling it. Humans aren't really controlling it. Obviously we've created the technology that is doing that for us now. And it's just like a myth machine, but the myths are almost oriented to confuse in a weird or sort of it just yeah, I feel we're living in a time of mythic confusion because there's so much information, there's so much coming at us that has been curated without us even really being aware that it's being curated for us. So we all exist within a bubble of myth, which maybe we always have. But now it's sort of, yeah, I like you say, when you're speaking with your students, you're sort of like, is the myth using you? Like you actually really need to tune into that and become aware of that, because otherwise you do just become an instrument of the myth, like capital T, capital M, the myth, whatever that is. Yeah, and I think that's also why so many people in the world are feeling drawn to returning to folklore or tradition of a simpler time where um, I don't know, the stories have an authenticity about them and a humanness about them, even when they're about gods and goddesses or earthly creatures. It's still something about it that, yeah, there's a real attraction for us into those stories. I guess because they're our stories, and that's why we tell them. Yeah, I
And
just
they're also stable.
and they're stable. Yeah, totally.
Um, and and even though our cultural context shifts, because they're written down,
Mm,
and also because we've studied them so much, they're kind of supported in a quite a stable container of meaning.
mm,
And scholarship and research provides that stable, what would you call it, scaffolding, if you like,
mm,
within which we can derive dependable meaning.
mm.
And that's not to say that there isn't work to reinterpret and re-understand these myths in every generation and make them appropriate to our own lives, which is how we make them live again.
Mm,
But initially they feel stable and they feel foundational, and therefore it's the best way to start learning about what myth is, because they don't move much,
no.
in their actual form. They move a lot when we bring them out into discussion and conversation, and we try and match these ancient meanings up with our meanings, which is often what happens on my courses, is that every time we come to discuss a certain episode or chapter or symbol or motif or whatever, or philosophy or concept, it's always different because everybody that turns up is always different. So
Mm,
there's always a new set of responses that need to be found as we
mm,
attune as individuals to these traditional forms, these traditional ideas. So it's an eternally fascinating and productive pursuit. But yeah, we're drawn to them because they're apparently stable and have been so for a very, very long time. Mm.
do you think it's important for people that exist within the Celtic diaspora to connect with the mythology of their heritage or their sort of ancestral home? Do you think? I mean, speaking from
Only
someone
if
that
it
isn't
affirms their
as
humanity.
yeah, yes, of course. Yeah, I love that. I love that as number one principle. It makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. Um,
Let's keep it at, you know, I'm always striving for that being the most important thing.
mm,
If it doesn't, and um, it turns us into a fetish. We turn
mm,
ourselves into our own fetish, basically.
mm,
If we're not doing that, yeah, because we fetishize the idea of our heritage and our
mm,
Celticness,
yeah.
and we are no longer living it as a human being. We're living it as a fantasy version of ourselves.
Mm,
And I think it's crucial that we don't let myth turn into delusion, because it easily can. Yeah, so easily can. Like any cultural meaning can be used to buttress a self
mm,
delusion, and we don't want myth to be that for us. If anything, we want it to elucidate and deepen our understanding of our own cultural experience.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. Fantastic. Well, I might ask you some questions about your music now, Gwilym. And
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Go
yeah.
for it.
um, and I guess just to sort of meander into the main river of the music talk from our discussion on mythology.
Mhm.
Do you think that mythology and music or stories and music are a really important combination? Is there something about the transmission of story through song or through music which is really important?
Um, that's a really good question. So as a performer, I'm often storytelling and playing music. So
Ah,
one of my
it's
more
like not doing both at the same time. You're singing a
one of my more regular gigs is to go and tell yeah to so I'll go and tell the tale of Taliesin, for example, or
Mm,
sometimes the first branch of the Mabinogi. Relatively straightforward story that's rich and simple and easy for people who've got no experience with the Welsh tradition at all to understand and grasp. Yeah. And what I usually do is that, because I'm not a regular type of storyteller who just tells the story. I'm really interested in what stories mean. So I'll tell a bit of the story and then I'll open up a discussion on, well, what does this part of the story mean, therefore?
mm,
Or is it symbolic, mythic, spiritual, philosophic content? And then we'll take a break and I'll sing a song. And the song is usually unrelated
okay.
to the story itself. But what the singing does is it sets a mood, and it also um, it kind of energizes another part of the audience's imagination.
Mm,
And it what I find happens, and what I'm over the years, what I'm because obviously I'm still learning myself, but what I'm learning more and more is that music it's really the moment where a lot of the ideas and feelings of the story consolidate for the audience. It's like they're given a moment to take a breath
Mm,
and to be in another space and to imagine in a different way, because the music is engaging a different part of their inspiration, if you like. So so using music to alternate with storytelling and to kind of have this sort of in out breath sense of how the imagination works, I think it's really effective. I think it really works. Not to blow my own trumpet, but I think it works really well for small audiences, intimate audiences. It's a bit more difficult when the audiences get really big, because you
mm,
need a certain degree of intimacy with the audience to really bring them into the performance, if you like.
yeah.
But yeah, the and over the last couple of years, I've had this sense of, yeah, how there are different phases in imagination, or different phases of inspiration, if you like. And you can sort of sense it in the audience of where they're at and when they need to take a bit of a break and be
Mm,
immersed in a different type of imaginative experience, which is the music and the singing. Which is, and I'm singing in Welsh, and a lot of the time, people don't understand Welsh, so they're hearing
mm,
a language they've never heard before, and they're like,
mm.
oh, what's he going on about? So there's a whole
It's a
different
musical
imaginative.
language, though. So I think people would appreciate the Welsh as part of the music as opposed to going, oh,
Yeah,
what is this noise?
I hope
What-
so. I hope so.
Yeah, that's what I find because I don't understand Welsh. I don't speak Welsh, but when I hear the Welsh language sung, and I like to share a lot of Welsh Cymraeg
Mm,
tracks on the Celtic session, my program. And there's a beauty in the language and the sounds and the with Welsh, it's like a breathiness. It's like it's got such a unique sound. Do you think Welsh music has like a flavor? Do you think there's like a
mm.
style that's yeah, I
I
always
wouldn't say
play
it's not a
it's not
style.
a style, but a yeah,
It's the
style's not a good
quality
word.
of
The
the yeah
quality.
quality of the language itself, for sure. And of course, we can't really talk about the sound of the Welsh language without talking about the bardic tradition and the tradition of classical poetry that we have, that in many ways it's a refinement of sound effects, if you like, in language.
Yeah.
So the poetry in Wales, we say o'r glust i'r galon, from the ear to the heart. So it has to appeal to the ear before it can touch the heart. Yeah. So it has to sound
Ah,
good before it's going to move you.
yeah.
So there's a consciousness in our in our artistic endeavors, if you like, about the sound of something.
Wow.
And obviously this isn't something that's always so conscious to all Welsh songwriters, but to many of us I think it is, particularly those of us who have a deeper interest perhaps in Welsh literature also. There is certainly a consciousness about the way something sounds, and the
Mm,
sound of it is as important as the meaning of it.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I think I can hear that in the music. And it almost has a sort of ethereal, and maybe it's because I'm an English speaker and I don't understand what is being sung, but I think it really is that it has a particular, yeah, it's sort of this otherworldly, um, and something about, like I said, with the breathiness, there's something about the human, even just the sounds that the Welsh language makes. And I can't roll my R's my mouth doesn't work like that. I cannot roll my R's, but just to hear those sounds, it has, yeah,
Mm.
really, I love Welsh music because of that. And but then it's even the atmosphere of the music is different. Like you listen to Irish music and and I'm talking about sort of not necessarily just traditional music, because when I'm talking about Welsh music here, I'm thinking about more modern, I guess, folk Welsh music, but it's got an atmosphere about it, which is almost, it's a little bit suspenseful, and there's something a bit dramatic about it. And like
Mm.
thinking of Murray Matthias and like Vree and Canavan and all these sorts of people, like even Canavan, which is a bit more sort of like up. He always reminds me of Kings of Convenience, but it's sort of this, it has
Mm.
this particular, yeah, quality to it, which is really unique. And I think that's something really special, that it can be identified as belonging to Wales and
Mm.
sort of. So how important is music for you culturally as like a part of your cultural identity? Is it something that has played a big role in how you see yourself as a Welshman and singing in the Welsh language? Is that because
Yeah,
obviously
I
you
mean,
don't, I don't think I've ever heard you sing in English. Do you ever sing in English, Gwilym? Or it's
I've
not.
done a few things in English, and
Okay.
I appear to be doing a bit more these days. But I mean, I'm a musician first. You know,
Mm.
that's really all of my endeavors. Really are focused on me just getting to play more music.
Yeah,
Really.
awesome.
So I mean, you know, I've ended up, you know, studying literature and mythology and you know Celtic mythology and anthropology. You know, I've done all the sort of the university stuff, which I love, but you know, I I've always been a musician first, really. It's
Okay.
just that you can't really make much of a living out of Welsh language music. Some people
Mm.
can, but it's rare, you know. I'm not such a great player of the game.
Mm.
So it's quite difficult to make a living out of Welsh language music, and therefore, you know, as a dad, I've got to do stuff that earns me a living. And for
Yeah.
whatever reason, teaching Celtic mythology, you know, provides a much more stable income, which is
Mm.
weird in itself. I'm often, you know, amazed by how I've ended up doing this job, but there you go, that's what I do. And you know,
Dream job.
I'm always going to be a musician. I will always play music. I'll always write music, and I'm always going to try and find ways of doing more.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, sometimes it just has to take a back burner because it's
Mm.
music is unfortunately one of the most devalued
Oh.
of the public arts, I would say, today. You know,
Mm.
like just the fact that one play on Spotify will
Oh.
earn you 0.0004 cents.
It's awful. I
It's
hate Spotify.
it's just depressing, you know, but that is the way that music is distributed. So if you want to play the game, you have to play the game, and that's what you have to
Mm.
do. But you know, we're so used to music being free as
Mm.
you know, and it could work as a model, like a free service, like a public service. But at some point, we need to stop taking advantage of people's egos, which is what happens at the minute.
Yeah.
You know, the reason why most musicians still put music out is because they want people to like their music. So it's like,
Mm.
and there's a whole industry based around this model of taking advantage of people's desires to be liked, basically.
Mm. Wow. I hadn't actually thought of that before. Of
Well,
course it
yeah,
is.
it's what, yeah, of course it is. You know, we
Yeah.
as musicians, we want people to hear our music because it gives us
Yeah.
a buzz and it makes us feel
Yeah.
like, yeah, we're doing it, you know. But that, of course, you know, there's the dark side of that. There's so much narcissism involved in the music industry. It's sort of dripping with the stuff. But you
Yeah.
know, but then the business model of people like Spotify is basically just to parasite, but to parasitize that, to take advantage of that
Mm.
desire to be heard. Yeah.
Mm.
And therefore, you know, we will demean ourselves and just give it away for free.
Yeah.
But try and do it differently, and you know, you'll be permanently under a rock because no one's ever going to want to pay for your music when everybody else's is free.
Yeah.
We've already reached lowest common denominator. Like it happened like a few years back. We've reached almost zero, you know, in value of music, which
Wow.
is it's just depressing, you know. It's like, mate, you know, and it's not the end of the world in terms of music. We're still going to make music, you know, we're still going to be doing it. It's just we have to monetize it in so many different and bizarre ways these days. It's just
But
like
surely
you
that's a
know,
loss to it's a loss to the art if it's not supported. Like the people that that could have made music that choose not to, like yourself, music has to go on the back burner because you have to earn an income to support your family. Imagine
mm,
the music that could be produced if people didn't have to do that and they could be supported. Yeah. It's at a cost really, isn't it? the consumer's laziness and greed, is really ruining an art form that's as old as there's a
Yeah.
culture, sort of. And I don't, the
I
thing, sorry, I was
sorry, go
just
on.
going to say the thing about music, and it always blows my mind, is that we were never supposed to be able to record it. Music was not supposed to be, I know that that's an evolution in technology, but I feel like our relationship with music was always supposed to be alive, in a live setting where there was a player and the audience or the listeners, and you had that feedback, like that organic feedback between those two, and that's a relationship. And now we have, you wouldn't know who listens to your music, if anyone listens to the music. You just yeah, it's this, yeah, it's like an aberration of the original form. Like, and now everyone listens to music all the time, and we take, like you say, we take it for granted because you can just put it on your speaker and play it off Spotify or YouTube or whatever, and then you don't have to think about it. And that's, yeah, I think there's there's a cost in that we can't quite yet quantify.
I think you're totally right that it changes the quality of music because what ends up happening is that musicians start making the music that they think will be heard as opposed
Mm,
to the music they want to be heard.
yeah.
So our egos, for whatever reason, these sort of underfed, malnourished parts of ourselves are so desperate to be seen and heard that we will skew our instinctive drive to create
Mm,
towards a particular style and form, which is kind of okay, in some ways, but it does change. It ultimately alters the quality and type of music that's created. And, I don't want to, I'm far more likely to blame the service providers than the consumers themselves because being a consumer myself, like we haven't got the bloody time,
mm,
like life is busy, particularly when you've got a family. Like we haven't got the time to sort of to think through the implications of all our actions. We're kind of caught in this context that's sort of provided for us by people who do actually have power and influence and who could make a difference, but choose to do otherwise. But I totally hear you with the massive difference between live music and recorded music for sure. That there's a part of me that does I do fetishize you know good analog recorded music. Like there's something about a good Led Zepp album
oh yeah,
that
yes,
that that really does something really good. Yeah, that's really
yeah,
it's a thing.
yeah,
It's like a great feast. Um, but then again, live music is something totally different, and it is something that's it's always something I'm trying to get back to. That's I will record music because it helps me get gigs, but the end goal is to go and play live in front of a bunch of
yeah,
people because
yeah,
that's where
okay,
it really happens. That's where it's
yeah,
alive, yeah. That's where you feel the spirit move, yeah. So it's like
yeah,
that's where it has to end up for me. I know, for other people it's not the case, and there's different strokes, different folks. Some people prefer. Some artists will only record and never play live. But I
mm,
think they're missing out personally. Yeah.
mm. So you made reference there to feeling the spirit move there, Gwilym. Do you
Mhm.
think there's something about music and a connection to the soul, or it being something that goes deep within? It's not of this world. There's something spiritual happening there.
Yeah. I think it alters our consciousness.
Mm,
Um, and I think if if we're looking for moments of transcendence where we are no longer bound by our identities, where we can step into a sense of belonging to something greater than ourselves,
mm,
then I think music is definitely one of the more accessible ways of doing that.
yeah.
particularly live music. And you know, like I'm not a big spiritual philosopher in many ways. Um, but in my own limited understanding of these things, you know, what we mean by spirit or spirituality is simply the experience of being greater than what we normally are, that there's a
Mm,
greater reality that we're part of, there's something else. We have transcended our limited selves into something that's other, that's different to us. And the continual quest for that, I think, is healthy and is good, and
mm,
we should keep it up because it that's how we grow.
yeah.
That's how we grow. It's how we expand our souls. Um, and so, you know, in the moment of performance, it's something I often experience is that
Mm,
expansion, that expansiveness, where it feels like we're all in the same space. There's a dropping of barriers, if you like. And this is where it becomes emotionally powerful for people to hear good music performed live. I think, you know, there is a real, it's not just catharsis, it's the sense that we are being accepted as part of something greater. And it's
mm,
there's like a sense of coming home sometimes, you know, oh, we all belong together, even though we're all strangers and we don't know each other and we've got no idea what each other's backstories are or where we come from. In that moment where
mm,
the music has bonded us, then we're greater than ourselves and we feel, yeah, of course it's going to be emotional. We feel accepted and safe and supported and seen, if you like, and in a greater context. We have transcended our limitations. So yeah, I think it's a very powerful, I mean, for me it is, it's a very powerful spiritual experience. Sometimes words aren't sufficient to explain what it is, but yeah, that's with the limited words that we have, for sure.
mm.
Yeah.
Is there anything in sort of the ancient bardic tradition that speaks to that? Speaks to it being an experience beyond.
Yeah. Um, I mean, not explicitly because, well, sometimes explicitly. It's tricky with the Welsh bardic tradition because we only have quite a narrow example of what it was in the past.
Okay.
Because it's the poetry that survives is aristocratic poetry. It's very formal. It's ceremonial poetry in many ways. And only now and again do we get glimpses of this broader understanding of the energy of performance, if you like. But there's certainly a sense, a few rare glimpses of, you know, the bards being able to acknowledge that awen, you
Mm.
know, the Welsh term for spiritual divine inspiration, that awen is something that not only feeds the composition of the poem, but brings the poem alive in the moment of performance. So awen as an active energy or principle in the moment of performance that is the thing that engages everybody, if you like. But those
Wow.
glimpses are quite rare, but they are, you know, they do exist. They are there. This idea of the fieriness, the energetic quality of performance, you know, and the persona of the performing bard, this personality, this almost theatrical sense of presenting oneself, and the largesse and the grandeur and the majesty of that, you know, that really shines through in some of this classical poetry. Yeah.
Do you think we've become obsessed? Do you think over time from the ancient bardic tradition where you speak about the personality of the performer of the bard, do you think in
Mm.
the modern world that we've kind of like distorted that and that's why we have superstar musos and sort of we kind of worship these people? Do you think there's something about yeah, like it's sort of at the in the technological world where so many people can have access to your music, so you become hyper super famous as a bard, as a modern day bard, and then it's just this like that's you were talking about the narcissism of the industry and musicians. Do you think it's that it's that ancient bard, but in the in the modern day, like,
Yeah, I mean I would say it's a religious impulse
okay,
that we want to be in a devotional relationship with a higher power.
wow.
Uh, and you know, I'm not the first and I won't be the last. Plenty of ethnographers and anthropologists in the modern period have pointed out the similarity between, you know, being a super fan and
Mm.
being a member of a cult.
Yeah, okay.
You know, it's the same religious impulse to want to subject oneself to a higher power and to
Mm,
give oneself over. And of course, you know, there are some religious traditions that have refined that, and in some senses, it can be a positive experience to humble oneself and to position oneself in a in an appropriate relationship to something which deserves our veneration and worship and respect and humility. So
mm,
it's not all bad,
mm,
but yeah, it can also be superficial, demeaning. It can be a type of brainwashing,
mm.
and this isn't just with pop stars; it's with all types of media personalities.
Yeah,
You know, celebrities. The whole notion of celebrity is really it's a religious phenomena in my mind. And
yeah.
when we, you know, when we turn the volume up with this profound technology that we have, with the incredible power of the internet and the rate with which we can engage, not just in the phenomena of the superstar itself, but with the community that develops around it. So we become part of this cult like grouping.
Mm,
You know, I think that, you know, those experiences were still had in the past for sure. You know, humans have always been able to fixate and obsess and fetishize, you know, it's always been part of our makeup. But yeah, it has been turned up to 11 in the modern
mm,
period. And the dark side of it is far more apparent because we document ourselves and capture ourselves in this delusion. So
mm,
we will film, we'll selfie our own adoration, we'll
mm,
blog our own obsession. You know, we will document and record the delusion and the fantasy that we're immersed in. Um, and you know, and then what's kind of a bit sick about it is that then that becomes fodder for everybody else to sneer at
mm,
as like
mm.
a further extension of the entertainment value. So it's
Mm.
not just celebrity and adoration and the religious phenomena of being obsessed with someone. It's then the audience surrounding that, watching you doing that with the
Yeah. Oh
celebrity.
God, it's the
And
worst.
the sort of this is quite a sick cycle
Yeah.
of consumption and entertainment and sneering
Mm,
and the demeaning of the individual in all of that. And of course, then the people themselves who are sneering, who think themselves so high and mighty, and oh, you know, I'm not so idiotic as to be taken in by this. Well, what does that do to their humanity then? You know,
mm,
where's their compassion? Where's their understanding? You know, what's happened to really appreciating and understanding what's happening in culture, therefore? You know, what myth is using them?
yeah.
It's the myth of, well, I'm objective and I'm not getting sucked up in all this and I'm intelligent. And you know, it's a mythology, it's a dark mythology in its own right, you know, this
Yeah.
superiority, this intellectual superiority of sneering at all those idiots who get caught up in this stuff. So nobody comes out looking
No.
great, you know, really, I would say.
No, it all ends badly, really, doesn't it? Wow.
Sorry to bring us down there,
No,
but
that's, yeah, that's sort of, it's very interesting to look at just the state of the world and the fact that we can, yeah, we can
the
capture
bloody mess, eh?
ourselves in our
Gosh.
worst moments. capture the best moments, but there's also this dark side of
Yeah, yeah,
the things that we don't necessarily want to be. Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway.
But that shouldn't stop us engaging with
No.
modern communication technologies as we are now here.
Yeah.
We
So powerful.
absolutely, because as much as there is the dark side, there is going to be the side of humanity and,
Mm,
integrity and honesty and a profound and genuine quest for truth and value and purpose as well.
as
Because
well.
all the good, there's some amazing podcasts and
Oh
videos
yeah.
and content creators out there and musicians, like there's also the really good stuff, the good healthy stuff too. So we
Yeah.
shouldn't just turn it off just because
No.
it,
Just
yeah,
because it scares us in some of it. Yeah.
yeah.
Just
Well,
because
I
we
think
see a
it,
terrible reflection of ourselves in the screen.
oh, totally. I
Mm.
feel like for our kids' sake, we genuinely need to engage with it because this is the world they're going to be living in.
Of course.
So we need to get used to processing this culture as much as we can and engaging with it and
Mm,
transforming it to the better as much as we can.
totally.
Mm.
How do you find, let me rephrase that. Do you think that your obsession with Celtic myth, your fetish of Celtic myth, your so you work in mythology and you have a website, Gwilym, which is the Celtic Source website, and you have a podcast, and you do you have a podcast, don't you? Yeah, you
I
do. Well,
do.
you
It's
do.
just that, yeah,
You
I
haven't
don't
been able.
always get to publish
Okay,
stuff through it because
yeah,
I'm too
and
busy teaching,
of
basically.
course, yeah. But then you also have a YouTube channel as well. So you are very often buried amongst the deep myths of the Celtic world. Do you find
Wow.
that has an influence on your music? Do you think that influences the music you
Ah,
create?
totally.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
okay. So do you sing about myths? I wouldn't know because I can't speak Welsh. Or
Um,
are they
s- Sometimes, I
okay?
mean, I think that, lyric writing and poetry is a type of mythic expression,
Mm,
where we're seeking to resonate with these deep foundational meanings in culture, this mythic strand, this mythic layer. But, music for me is a very instinctive and impulsive process.
okay.
So I don't necessarily think, and today I'm going to write a song about Ceridwen. But inevitably what happens is because I've immersed myself in this tradition and I'm, firmly entangled in it. Of course, that's the stuff that's going to come out. Although I'm far more conscious about what I bring into myself these days in terms of influence, which is only something I've started doing as I got older, really. So, for example, today I'm far more inclined to be conscious of the fact, oh, I've got a song coming, so I'm going to go read poetry by this poet I love, because
Mm.
that's the influence I want to imprint on
Wow.
the song. And then, of course, because it's usually Welsh poetry, there's usually, a strand of Welsh myth implied in the poetry anyway, because that's usually the type of poetry I'm reading. Um, so I think I'm a little bit more conscious about, yeah, the inspiration these days, about what I'm imprinting on the impulse before it comes out. But I think that's just something that comes with age, to be honest, with maturity. When I was younger, I was just a bit wild. I was like, I just, yeah, write songs about everything and anything. It would just come out. Yeah. But a bit more conscious about it these days.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you have a particular favorite traditional Welsh language song
Ooh.
of the moment? Perhaps is the best way to describe it. I've asked this, I've posed this question to a few musicians, and they're caught off guard. They're sort of like, oh, there's so many.
There are the ones that I sing live most often because they work.
Okay.
And
How do you mean because they work? What's
Well,
working?
because they achieve the moment of yeah of I don't want to sound so poncy about it, but they achieve the moment of transcendence between you and the
Mm,
audience. They work. They
cool.
enable us to drop our guard and to have like a real emotional connection with each other. And we all get moved because we're all, I'm the one who's singing, playing guitar, but we're all in it together, me and
Yeah.
the audience. So
Yeah.
those songs, the ones I return to most often, because they work in that sense. They
Okay.
they they do the thing that we all need them to do, which is
Mm,
yeah, to collapse the divide between performer and audience. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a few of them.
yeah.
Do you want to know what they are? Do you?
Yeah, I would love to know what they are because what I would like to do is play them. So on my Celtic session, Gwilym, I want to play some of your music.
Okay.
I'll have this interview sort of dispersed amongst the tracks, and then I'd like to play some of your influences. So we kind of get this well-rounded view of like
Okay.
this art form that you're creating.
Uh, well, the one that I always come back to is Hunter Pryd, which is from, I think it's on the very first official album I released,
Ah,
Traffig, I think. So that's one that I have always had in my set.
okay.
It's always been there. And that was it's one of the songs that my mum used to sing to us when we were kids,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's always been there, if you like. I remember my mum had a book of Welsh folk ballads, Caneuon Mabsant, if I'm not mistaken. It's in like an old book of Welsh folk music from the 60s and 70s. And I remember that was the version that she used to sing to us. And then, of course, as with folk music, you kind of make it your own. So my version is obviously going to sound very different to other performers' versions because I've been singing it so long and I've got my own way of doing it.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily my all-time favorite because I don't think I could ever pin it down to being a one all-time favorite, but it's definitely the one that I keep returning to most.
Wonderful. And so
Mm.
did you grow up was your family musical, Gwilym? You said your mum would sing to you. Was
Um,
she a great influence in your musical, in your pursuit of
yeah, I mean,
music?
not especially so. I mean, my mum was really keen that both my sister and I learnt guitar, but I think my mum was definitely formative in that sense, and she used to sing a lot of traditional folk songs with us when we were kids.
Wow.
And then you know, being fortunate enough to have a Welsh language education, singing in the school choir was always a big part of my life. So I sang, been singing 4-part, 3-part, 2-part harmony since I was so high until I
Wow.
was 18, so constantly sang. And we had a really good choir teacher in school, a man called John Daniels, he really took us as a choir, as a school choir, and really showed us what excellence was, I suppose, what
Wow.
what really good music was. And we sang all kinds of stuff, classical music, hymns, all kinds of stuff. And we were a really good choir. We used to compete across Wales. I think we won choir of the year once. We were really high flying school choir, if you like.
Wow.
And that's singing several times a week for extended periods, learning relatively complicated harmonies and parts. That's really where my sense of singing comes from. And that with my mum's sort of, yeah, her own interest in Welsh music and singing with us when we were little was obviously a big part of that too. But then, me and my sister also, we sing together sometimes still.
Mm.
We used to sing a lot together back in the day. Hopefully, we'll do more in the future. We haven't sung together for a little bit now, but yeah, every now and again, you know, over the years, my sister and myself have got together and sung songs, and I write and she writes a bit sometimes. And yeah, it's just part
Yeah.
of our family life, I suppose, part of my upbringing to sing. Yeah.
How beautiful. And your last name is Baird, or you're sort of you're Gwilym
Mhm.
Morus-Baird. And does that come from Bard? Or am I completely off there?
Oh, so my name growing up was Gwilym Morris,
Okay.
and as an
Ah,
artist, yeah.
okay.
So then I met my wife, and my wife's name is Lucy Baird.
Oh,
And Baird is, yeah, I mean, it's Gaelic, but I think for her family, it comes through Scotland. It means bard, a
oh.
bard, B-A-R-D. So when we got married, I was like, I'm having that. I like that.
I love that.
So she, you know, we
Oh,
combined our names and we made a
that's
double-barreled name.
I love that.
Yeah,
That's
so
really
it's my wife's
special.
name that I took on. Yeah, and she took my
Yeah.
name on.
Yeah, wow. Okay, there you
Yeah.
go. I wondered for a second there that whether there was some connection
Well, I couldn't
into
not do it
you
considering my
couldn't not.
interests.
I mean, but you actually did it because you're all for like men taking on women's last names, aren't you?
Yeah,
That's really why
yeah,
you did
well,
it.
that
Yeah.
too. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Um, so that okay, so that I've got your favorite, not all-time favorite, but one of your dearest
Yeah.
traditional Welsh songs, dearest to your heart. Do you have a favorite traditional singer that I could share with people? A Welsh
Well,
mus
there is
musician.
the great Mike Stevens.
Okay.
Um, I don't think any of us can go very far in the Welsh singer-songwriter world without acknowledging the massive influence that Mike Stevens was on us and still
Wow.
is, still going, I think. Um, and one album in particular, Nor Sti Nor Star,
Okay.
and there's a few tracks on there. Um, yeah, just some wonderful, wonderful music on that album. He's often called like the Welsh Bob Dylan,
Ah,
um, or Bob Dylan is the American Mike Stevens, depending on which way
yeah, okay.
you want to
Surely Dylan's
position it.
a Welsh name though, right?
Yeah,
With a
but I
Y.
think you know if we're looking at like the foundations of modern Welsh singer-songwriter, yeah, music, then Mike Stevens is definitely up there
Wonderful.
as one of the greats. And then you know there's a whole bunch of modern musicians. Um, you know, some of them who are friends of mine that I really admire. You know, there's some really good work happening now at the minute with there's a really brilliant young harpist by the name of Keris Havana. And Keris Havana, I think, is magic.
Awesome.
Uh, and then there's a friend of mine, Owen Shires, who goes
Yes,
under the
I've
name Kenevin.
yeah, yeah. I've
Um,
played off his Telf. I played a song called Telfie or something off one of his, or maybe that's the name
Tavy,
of that.
yeah,
Yeah, Tafy. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's yeah, beautiful, beautiful stuff.
he's really amazing. We actually do put a show on together on Welsh history of protest and land rights
Oh, really?
that we've been touring for a few years. Yeah, called Gavel Tir. We both we tell stories and you know perform music together.
Amazing.
Um, that's been something we've done for the last sort of 6 or 7 years, Owen and
Wow.
myself. Um, and there's you know like God, there's so many good singer-songwriters. You know, of my generation, I suppose, Gwyneth Glyn, Alan Tan, Gareth Bonello, The Gentle Good. You know, there's so many good ones. It would be hard to narrow them down, but Mike Stevens is like the granddaddy of what
Okay.
we do in the modern Welsh singer-songwriter scene, I suppose.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I will find some tracks off the album you mentioned, or I might get your recommendations over email, Gwilym, and then
Okay.
I can make use of those. Now I wanted on the Celtic session episode that I'm going to be making where I'm featuring you, I want to play a few of the songs from your um I was going to say from your soon to be released album, but apparently there's no album because we don't do it that way anymore. I'm
Well, I
behind the
mean, there
times.
might be.
There might
We'll
be,
see.
but
We'll see
from
if
unreleased tracks, hear it first here on the Amy Dillon's Celtic session.
absolutely.
But in particular, I really loved Dinas. And
Hmm.
yeah, that song, it's so sweet and it sort of has this innocence and like transience about it. It's a gorgeous track. Could you share a story with me about how that song was made or what inspired you to make that song and yeah, the
Yeah.
process?
Well, funnily enough, it connects to the traditional song I mentioned. So
Oh,
Pontypridd means in Pontypridd. And Pontypridd is a town in the valleys in South Wales. And in the traditional song, there's a totally different story in the traditional song where it's about a young man and the woman he loves is marrying someone else because he's poor and she wants a stable life and all that kind of stuff. So that's the traditional song,
mm,
Pontypridd. But my wife and I, we were living in Pontypridd about a decade ago now. And Pontypridd it's in the valleys, so it's one of the satellite towns to the biggest city in Wales, Cardiff. And it's a very busy area, old industrial area, big roads, slag heaps, quarry mess everywhere, old rotten industry everywhere. Um, and you're basically really close to the city. And we were there because, as usual, we'd moved because we could get more work closer to the city. And I think we spent about 10 months there living in Pontypridd. And, my wife was commuting into the city and I was just starting my courses at the time because I couldn't actually find any official work. So I was like, well, I've got all these qualifications, I'm going to go and teach Celtic myth. So that's where I actually started teaching
cool.
online was when I was living in Pontypridd. But one thing after another happened, and it turned out that we just couldn't afford to stay, basically. So we had to move, and we moved um, to back to Mid Wales, where to the area where my son had been born, and we moved to the seaside.
Mm.
And the song Oer Ddinas, it means cold city. It's really about just saying goodbye to the city, and I'm kind of
Ah.
relieved that we're going back to live by the sea. So it's kind of a like, there's an English version of the song. It starts cold city, you won't remember me, but I'm leaving, I'm heading back to the sea.
Oh,
So even though we were kind of moving back to a place where there was much less work and we were going to be much worse off, it was also kind of that relief of, yeah, we get to go and live by the sea again.
yeah.
And just that sense of the blessing of the water sort of cleansing and really, you know, feeling like we were coming back to a land which we felt could be home.
Mm,
Uh, and nothing against Pontypridd. Like the people in Pontypridd were very welcoming and lovely, and like a really strong sense of community down there. But it just wasn't the place for us. So it's just
mm,
that sense of moving home, and
yeah.
being moving back somewhere where you feel like we can live and we can raise a family here. Mm.
That's beautiful. I think you can sense that in the song. It has that sort of light
Yeah.
feel to it. So
Mm.
yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Gwilym. I really enjoyed speaking to you and asking you
You're
all
very
these
welcome.
questions about your music and about myth and about what
Mm.
it's like to be in the world as it were today. Is there anything that you would like to add, Gwilym, before I finish
No,
our
no,
recording?
just thank you very much for asking me along. And if anybody wants to know more, I suppose you can go to celticsource.online. That's where I do my work. And there's music stuff at gwilmore.com.
Awesome.
Yeah, if people want to know more, that's where it all is.
Thank you so much, Gwilym.